The blood-red sunset painted the dusty streets of Promise Creek as Beatrice Barlow's tears fell upon the parched earth of the wagon yard. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild and unforgiving, especially to a woman alone. Her shoulders trembled with each sob, her knuckles white as she gripped the splintered edge of an empty wagon that wasn't hers, would never be hers now that Thomas was gone. "Madam? You all right there?" The deep voice startled her. Beatrice hastily wiped her face with her sleeve, smudging dirt across her tear-stained cheeks. She looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the fading light. As he stepped closer, she made out the details: worn leather boots, dusty denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice betraying her. The stranger moved closer, and she could finally see his face. Strong jawline, a few days' worth of stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wasn't smiling, but there was kindness in his expression. "Don't look fine to me," he said, leaning against the wagon. "Name's Xavier Ellis. Most folks call me Zav." Beatrice hesitated before answering. "Beatrice Barlow. Mighty pleased to meet you, Miss Barlow, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He gestured to the tear tracks on her face. "Mind telling me what's got you so upset?" Beatrice took a shuddering breath. The story spilled from her lips before she could stop it: how she'd come west with her brother Thomas after their parents died of influenza back in Boston, how Thomas had promised they'd build a new life, how they'd spent everything on supplies for homesteading, and how, just yesterday, Thomas had been thrown from his horse and broken his neck. He was buried this morning in the town cemetery, and now she was alone, with no money, no family, and nowhere to go. Xavier listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each word. "So you see, Mr. Ellis," she concluded, "this wagon isn't even mine. It belongs to Mr. Patterson at the Mercantile. Thomas had paid half, but without the rest." She trailed off, her throat tight. Xavier stood silent for a moment, contemplating. Then he removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair, and said something that would change Beatrice's life forever. "You'll have a wagon of your own soon, Miss Barlow. I promise you that." Beatrice stared at him, confusion replacing her sorrow for a moment. "I beg your pardon. My ranch is short-handed, and I've been looking for someone to help with the cooking and such. Pays fair, and you'd have your own cabin. Safe place to stay while you figure things out." He placed his hat back on his head. "And I'll help you get that wagon. Can't have you losing your brother's dream on top of everything else." Suspicious, Beatrice narrowed her eyes. "Why would you help a stranger, Mr. Ellis?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Because 7 years ago, I was where you are now. Lost my pa to a rattlesnake bite, ma to grief 6 months later. Had nothing but the clothes on my back and a broken-down horse." He shrugged. "Someone helped me then. Seems only right to pass it on." Beatrice considered his offer. She'd heard stories about women in her position being taken advantage of, but there was something honest in Xavier's eyes, and she had few options. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it. Come out to the ranch tomorrow. See for yourself before deciding." He reached into his pocket and handed her a few coins. "That'll get you a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house for tonight. Tell her I sent you." Before she could protest, he tipped his hat and said, "First stage leaves at 7. I'll be waiting." With that, Xavier Ellis walked away, his spurs jingling softly against the gathering twilight, leaving Beatrice clutching the coins and wondering if she'd just been offered salvation or something far more complicated. Morning came too quickly for Beatrice. She'd spent the night in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a clean but sparse establishment run by a widow with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. True to Xavier's word, the coins he'd given her covered the room and a simple breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and coffee. As Beatrice prepared to leave, Mrs. Henderson handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Ellis asked me to give you this," she said. "Said you might need it for your journey." Inside, Beatrice found a sturdy canvas coat, practical leather gloves, and a small knife in a sheath. Practical gifts for life on a ranch. Not personal enough to be inappropriate, but thoughtful nonetheless. She put on the coat, finding it only slightly large on her slender frame. The stagecoach driver helped her aboard, and she found herself the only passenger. As promised, Xavier was waiting when the stage pulled into the small depot near his ranch. He sat astride a magnificent chestnut gelding, and beside him was a wagon not new, but solid and well-maintained. "Good morning, Miss Barlow," he called, dismounting smoothly. "I see the coat fits well enough." "Thank you for your kindness," she replied, clutching her small carpet bag, all she had left in the world. "The gloves and knife as well." Xavier nodded. "Practical things for practical times." He gestured to the wagon. "Thought you might like to see the ranch before making your decision. It's about 5 miles from here." The journey to the Ellis ranch gave Beatrice time to study her potential employer. Xavier Ellis was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30. His movements were efficient, his handling of the horses gentle but firm. He wasn't overly talkative, but answered her questions readily enough. "How large is your ranch, Mr. Ellis?" "About 2,000 acres. Not the biggest in the territory, but respectable. Run about 500 head of cattle, some horses. Got good water, which makes all the difference out here." "And who else lives there?" "My foreman, Hank Miller, been with me since the beginning. 5 cowboys, though that number grows during roundup and branding. Cook named Ernesto, Mexican fella, makes the best beans you'll ever taste. And Mrs. Abernathy, who helps with the house and garden, though her arthritis makes it hard these days. That's where you'd come in, if you decide to stay." "I don't know much about ranching," Beatrice admitted. "I was a teacher back in Boston." Xavier's eyebrows rose in surprise. "A teacher? Well, now that's something. No school yet in these parts, but might be soon as more families settle. Could be useful." As they crested a small rise, Xavier pulled the wagon to a stop. Below them stretched the Ellis Ranch, a large, well-built main house made of logs and stone, a bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods. In the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling grassland. "It's beautiful," Beatrice breathed. "It's home," Xavier replied simply. They continued down the slope, and as they approached, a tall, weather-beaten man with a gray-streaked beard emerged from the barn. "Hank," Xavier called, "this is Miss Beatrice Barlow. She might be joining us to help Mrs. Abernathy." The foreman touched his hat respectfully. "Madam, hope you do stay. Mrs. A could use the help, and it'd be nice having someone with book learning around. These cowboys ain't much for conversation beyond horses and cattle." Xavier showed her to a small cabin near the main house. It was simple but clean, with a bed, table, chair, and small stove. A window looked out toward the mountains in the distance. "This would be yours," he said. "Mrs. Abernathy stayed here before moving into the main house. It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Beatrice interrupted, already imagining how she could make it her own. Xavier seemed pleased. "You'd take your meals with us in the main house, help Mrs. Abernathy with cleaning, mending, the garden, and such. Pays $20 a month, plus room and board. And as for that wagon, Mr. Ellis," she said, turning to face him directly, "why are you really doing this? We're strangers." He met her gaze steadily. "Like I said, someone helped me once. Man named Jenkins took me in, taught me ranching. Left me this place when he died. No children of his own." He paused. "And maybe I recognize something in you, Miss Barlow. Same determination I had. Not willing to let circumstance beat you." Beatrice considered his words, then nodded. "I'll stay, Mr. Ellis. At least for a while. Call me Xav," he said. "Everyone does." "Then you must call me Beatrice." They shook hands, and Beatrice felt something shift between them, not quite friendship yet, but the possibility of it. "About that wagon," he continued. "I've got a deal with Patterson. You'll work here, and each month, part of your pay goes toward it. By year's end, it'll be yours free and clear." "That's very generous." Xavier shook his head. "It's fair. You'll earn every cent." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Your brother had the right idea, you know. Land's the thing out here. Something to call your own." As Beatrice settled into her cabin that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, she thought perhaps Thomas had led her here, after all, not to the homestead they'd planned, but to something unexpected. A chance to rebuild. The first weeks at Ellis Ranch were the hardest. Beatrice's hands, soft from years of turning pages and writing on chalkboards, blistered and cracked from the harsh soap and hot water. Her back ached from bending over the garden, and she discovered muscles she never knew existed. But she refused to complain, working alongside Mrs. Abernathy, a stout woman in her 60s with faded red hair and a no-nonsense attitude that masked a kind heart. "You're doing well, girl," Mrs. Abernathy said one afternoon as they snapped beans on the porch. "Most city folk don't last a week out here." "I'm not most city folk," Beatrice replied, smiling despite her exhaustion. "No, you certainly ain't. Xavier has a good eye for people." Beatrice glanced toward the corral where Xavier was working with a young colt, his movements patient and deliberate. "He's a good man, isn't he?" Mrs. Abernathy followed her gaze. "One of the best I've known. Lost too much too young, but it didn't make him hard like some." She studied Beatrice's face. "He watches you, you know, when you're not looking." Heat rose to Beatrice's cheeks. "I'm sure he's just making sure I'm doing my work properly." The older woman chuckled. "If that's what helps you sleep at night, dear." As spring gave way to summer, Beatrice found her rhythm. She learned to make sourdough bread, to preserve vegetables from the garden, to mend shirts with tiny, even stitches. She discovered that the cowboys, rough men with calloused hands and sun-weathered faces, had a reverence for the written word, and began reading aloud in the evenings first newspapers, then books from Xavier's surprisingly extensive library. One evening in late July, she found Xavier alone on the porch, smoking a cigarette and gazing at the stars. "May I join you?" she asked. He nodded, offering her the rocking chair while he leaned against the porch railing. "The men enjoyed the chapter you read tonight," he said. "Twain has a way with words. They're good men, hungry for stories." She paused. "Your library is impressive. Books were my mother's passion. She taught me to read before I could ride. Said a man needs both to make his way in the world." "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. Sadness flickered across his face. "What about your parents?" Beatrice smiled at the memory. "My father was a professor of literature. Mother played piano beautifully. Our home was always full of books and music." Her smile faded, until the influenza took them both within a week of each other. "I'm sorry," Xavier said softly. They fell silent, the night sounds washing over them, crickets chirping, the occasional low of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "How are you finding ranch life?" Xavier asked after a while. "Different than I expected. Harder in some ways, easier in others." She looked at him directly. "I'm grateful, Xav, for the opportunity, for keeping your promise about the wagon." His eyes, silver in the moonlight, met hers. "You've earned it. You're good for this place. The men respect you. Mrs. Abernathy adores you. Even Ernesto smiles more since you came. And what about you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Xavier's gaze intensified. The moment was broken by the sound of hoofbeats. A rider approached at speed, and Xavier straightened, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Boss," the rider called. It was Miguel, one of the younger cowboys. "Rustlers hit the north pasture. Took maybe 20 head. Hank sent me to fetch you." Xavier's expression hardened. "Tell Hank I'm coming." He turned to Beatrice. "Don't wait up. This might take a while." "Be careful," she said, suddenly afraid. He touched the brim of his hat. "Always am." As he mounted his horse and rode into the darkness, Beatrice realized two things. Cattle rustling was a hanging offense in this territory, and somewhere along the way, Xavier Ellis had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Xavier didn't return until late the next day, dusty, unshaven, and grim. The rustlers had escaped, but they'd recovered most of the cattle. One of the rustlers had been shot during the pursuit, not fatally, but enough to slow them down. The wounded man was now locked in the storage cellar until the sheriff could come from Promise Creek. "His name's Pete Dawson," Xavier explained over dinner. "Part of the Carson gang. Been hitting ranches all across the territory." "What will happen to him?" Beatrice asked. "Sheriff will take him to the county seat for trial. If he's lucky, prison. If not." Xavier didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That night, Beatrice tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Around midnight, she gave up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The night was cool, the moon nearly full. She walked toward the main house, thinking she might get a book to read, when she noticed a light still burning in Xavier's study. She hesitated, then knocked softly on the door. "Come in," he called. Xavier sat at his desk, ledgers open before him, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He looked tired but managed a small smile when he saw her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No, you neither, it seems." He sighed, pushing the ledger away. Too much on my mind. Rustlers, drought to the south, beef prices falling. He took a sip of whiskey. The burden of responsibility, I suppose. You don't have to carry it alone, she said softly. Something shifted in his expression. Don't I? That's what being the boss means. Even bosses need someone to talk to sometimes. Xavier studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Would you like some tea? I can ask Ernesto. No, don't wake him. I can make it myself. They moved to the kitchen together. Beatrice prepared tea while Xavier leaned against the counter, watching her movements. The domesticity of the moment struck her how natural it felt to be in this kitchen with him in the quiet hours of the night. When the tea was ready, they returned to his study. Beatrice settled into the leather chair, warming her hands on the cup. Tell me something, Xavier said suddenly. If your brother had lived, what was your plan? The question surprised her. We had a claim about 30 miles west of here. Thomas wanted to build a farm, grow wheat, maybe raise some horses. She smiled wistfully. I was going to start a school eventually. And now? Beatrice considered the question. Now, I'm not sure. I've grown fond of this place. Of the people here. She looked up and found him watching her intently. Of some more than others, she added quietly. Xavier set his glass down and leaned forward. Beatrice, a loud crash from outside interrupted them, followed by shouting. Xavier was on his feet instantly, grabbing his gun from the desk drawer. Stay here, he ordered, but Beatrice was already following him to the door. Outside, they found chaos. The prisoner, Pete Dawson, had somehow escaped the cellar and was attempting to steal a horse. Hank and 2 other cowboys were in pursuit, but Dawson had managed to mount and was heading straight for where Xavier and Beatrice stood on the porch. Get back, Xavier shouted, pushing Beatrice behind him just as Dawson fired wildly in their direction. Xavier returned fire, his shot more precise. Dawson jerked in the saddle but didn't fall. He swerved past them, firing again. Beatrice felt something hot graze her arm and cried out in pain. Beatrice. Xavier's voice was anguished as he caught her, lowering her to the porch floor. Where are you hit? It's just my arm, she gasped, feeling warm blood soaking through her sleeve. Go after him. Xavier hesitated, torn between pursuing Dawson and staying with her. I'll stay with Miss Barlow, Mrs. Abernathy said, appearing suddenly beside them. Go on, Xavier. With a last concerned look at Beatrice, Xavier mounted the nearest horse and galloped after the escaping prisoner. Mrs. Abernathy helped Beatrice to the kitchen, where she cleaned and bandaged the wound, a deep graze that would leave a scar, but wasn't life-threatening. He'll bring that man back, Mrs. Abernathy said confidently. Xavier Ellis doesn't let anyone hurt what's his. Beatrice looked up sharply. I'm not his. The older woman smiled knowingly. Aren't you? Dawn was breaking when Xavier returned, his expression thunderous. Pete Dawson was draped over a horse, very much alive but bound tightly. He'll live to see a proper hanging, Xavier said grimly, watching as Hank and Miguel took the prisoner to a more secure location, the root cellar, with a guard posted this time. Xavier's anger faded to concern when he saw Beatrice's bandaged arm. You should be resting, he said, gently touching the edge of the bandage. I'm fine. It looks worse than it is. His jaw tightened. He could have killed you. But he didn't, she reassured him, placing her hand over his. I'm still here. Something broke in Xavier's carefully maintained composure. He pulled her to him, mindful of her injury, and held her as if she might disappear. When I saw you fall, he murmured against her hair. I thought, I can't lose you too, Beatrice. I can't. She leaned back to look into his face, seeing naked emotion there for the first time. You won't lose me, she promised. Xavier cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened when she responded. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. I didn't plan for this, he said hoarsely. When I offered you work here, I never intended. I know, she interrupted. Neither did I. They stood together in the early morning light, the ranch coming to life around them, facing a future neither had anticipated, but both now wanted more than anything. The sheriff arrived that afternoon to collect Pete Dawson. A stern man with a silver star on his chest and lines etched deep into his face, Sheriff Taggart nodded approvingly at Xavier's handling of the situation. You did right, Ellis. Man like Dawson would have killed you all if he'd had the chance. He glanced at Beatrice's bandaged arm. Nearly did. Just make sure he faces justice, Xavier replied, his hand resting protectively at the small of Beatrice's back. The gesture wasn't lost on the sheriff, who raised an eyebrow but made no comment. As he prepared to leave with his prisoner, he pulled Xavier aside for a private word. Beatrice couldn't hear what was said, but Xavier's expression grew serious, and he nodded several times. What was that about? She asked when the sheriff had gone. Nothing to worry about, Xavier said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. That evening, the ranch celebrated. Ernesto prepared a feast, and even Mrs. Abernathy joined in, her arthritis forgotten as one of the cowboys played the fiddle and another the harmonica. Beatrice found herself swept into a lively dance by Hank, then passed from cowboy to cowboy until finally ending up in Xavier's arms. They're watching us, she whispered, nodding toward the men who were making a poor show of not staring. Xavier chuckled. Of course they are. They've been placing bets on us for months. Bets? On how long it would take for me to admit I've been in love with you since I found you crying in that wagon yard. Beatrice's heart skipped. You've never said that before. Said what? That you love me. Xavier's eyes softened. I thought it was obvious. But if you need the words I love you, Beatrice Barlow. More than this ranch, more than anything. I love you too, she whispered back, feeling as though her heart might burst with happiness. Later that night, walking back to her cabin under a canopy of stars, Xavier stopped and turned to her. I want to show you something tomorrow, he said. Will you ride with me? Of course. He kissed her hand, then her lips, lingering just long enough to leave her wanting more. Sweet dreams, Beatrice. The next morning, Xavier was waiting with 2 saddled horses when Beatrice emerged from her cabin. She wore the riding skirt Mrs. Abernathy had helped her alter and felt a small thrill at Xavier's appreciative glance. Where are we going? She asked as he helped her mount. You'll see. They rode for about an hour, climbing gradually into the foothills. The August sun was warm, but a pleasant breeze kept it from being uncomfortable. Xavier pointed out landmarks along the way: a lightning-struck tree where eagles nested, a natural spring with the sweetest water in the territory, the place where he'd shot his first deer as a boy. Finally, they crested a ridge, and Beatrice gasped at the view. Below them stretched a valley, green and lush, with a creek winding through it. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, still capped with snow despite the summer heat. It's breathtaking, she said. Xavier dismounted and helped her down. It's yours, he said quietly. Beatrice looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? This land. It's part of my ranch, but I've never used it. Too far from the main operation. He took both her hands in his. I want you to have it, Beatrice. Build your school here. Your brother's dream was land of your own. This can be it. Tears filled her eyes. Xav, I can't accept this. You can, he insisted. I've already had the papers drawn up. 160 acres, same as a homestead claim would be. But why? Xavier looked out over the valley, then back to her. Because I want you to be with me because you choose to be, not because you have nowhere else to go. He hesitated. And because I hope to build something here with you. A future. Maybe. A family. Beatrice's heart pounded. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. I'm not good with flowery words, Beatrice. But I know what I want, and it's you. Beside me, for the rest of our days. He dropped to one knee. Will you marry me? Joy bubbled up inside her, spilling over in laughter and tears. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. Yes, Xavier Ellis. I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It was my mother's, he explained. She'd have loved you. They sealed the promise with a kiss. The vastness of the West spread before them, full of possibility. The wedding took place in October, when the aspens had turned to gold and the first hint of winter sharpened the air. The entire town of Promise Creek turned out for the event, curious to see the Boston schoolteacher who had captured the heart of one of the territory's most eligible bachelors. Beatrice wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Abernathy and the women from town had helped her make, with lace sent all the way from Denver. Xavier, scrubbed clean and wearing a new black suit, looked so handsome it nearly took her breath away. The ceremony was simple, performed by the circuit preacher in the small church that served the community. Hank stood as Xavier's best man, while Mrs. Abernathy, beaming with pride, stood up for Beatrice. The cowboys from the ranch sat in the back, uncomfortably clean and continuously adjusting their collars, but grinning from ear to ear. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Xavier didn't hesitate, sweeping Beatrice into a kiss that had the congregation cheering and Mrs. Henderson dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was dancing, feasting, and more than a few toasts to the happy couple. As twilight deepened, Xavier pulled Beatrice away from the festivities. "I have something for you," he said, leading her toward the barn. Inside, illuminated by a single lantern, stood a wagon, not the second-hand one she'd been working to purchase from Mr. Patterson, but a brand-new one, painted a cheerful blue with red wheels. "Zav," she breathed, running her hand along the smooth wooden side. "You'll have a wagon of your own," he quoted himself, smiling. "I promised, didn't I?" "You did." She looked from the wagon to her husband, feeling overwhelmed by happiness. "And you've kept every promise you've made to me." "I intend to keep them all," he said seriously, "including the ones I made today." The celebration continued late into the night, but the newlyweds slipped away, riding in the new wagon to the main house, their house now. As Xavier carried her over the threshold, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way she never had before. Later, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Xavier traced the scar on her arm where Pete Dawson's bullet had grazed her. "I almost lost you before I ever really had you," he murmured. "But you didn't," she reminded him, pressing a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I'm here. I'm yours. And I'm yours," he vowed, "for all my days." Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. Beatrice settled into her role as mistress of Ellis Ranch, bringing order and warmth to the main house. In the evenings, she and Xavier would sit by the fire, reading or simply talking, planning their future together. "I want to start building the school in the spring," she said one night, sketching ideas in a notebook. "Nothing fancy at first, just one room." "I've been thinking," Xavier replied, stoking the fire. "The valley is perfect for it, but it's a long ride from town. What if we built some cabins too? For families who want their children to attend but live too far away." Beatrice looked up, surprised and pleased. "Like a boarding school? Something like that. Give parents in the outlying areas a chance to educate their children." "That would be wonderful." She set her notebook aside and moved to sit beside him on the bearskin rug. "You're a good man, Xavier Ellis." He pulled her close. "Only because you make me want to be." As winter deepened, news came that Pete Dawson had been convicted and hanged, along with 2 other members of the Carson gang. The remaining gang members had fled the territory, moving south toward New Mexico. "Good riddance," Hank declared when he brought the news. "Maybe we'll have some peace now." The ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of winter, feeding cattle, repairing equipment, preparing for spring. At Christmas, Beatrice organized a celebration for the ranch hands and neighboring families, complete with a tree cut from the foothills and decorated with paper chains and popcorn strings. "Never seen the place so lively," Mrs. Abernathy commented, watching as Xavier joined the Cowboys in a rendition of "Deck the Halls" that was more enthusiastic than tuneful. "You've brought life back to him, child." "He's brought life to me too," Beatrice replied, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach, where a secret was just beginning to grow. She told Xavier on New Year's Eve, after everyone else had gone to bed. They sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. "I have a gift for you," she said, handing him a small package. Inside was a tiny pair of knitted booties. Xavier stared at them uncomprehendingly for a moment. Then understanding dawned, and his face transformed with wonder. "Beatrice," he whispered, "are you saying?" She nodded, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "In July, the doctor thinks." Xavier gathered her in his arms, laughing and crying at once. "A baby," he kept saying. "Our baby." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Xavier insisted on building a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, working on it himself in the evenings after the ranch work was done. Beatrice sewed tiny garments and dreamed of the child growing within her. Spring came, bringing new calves and the start of construction on the school in the valley. Xavier hired extra men for the project, determined to have it ready by fall. Even if we only have a handful of students to start, Beatrice said, watching the walls go up. It will be worth it. This is just the beginning, Xavier promised. In 10 years, I bet we'll have 50 children here, learning reading and ciphering and whatever else you want to teach them. As Beatrice's belly swelled with new life, she glowed with happiness. The women from town and neighboring ranches held a quilting bee in her honor, each contributing a square to a baby blanket while sharing advice and stories of their own childbirths. You're lucky to have Xavier, Mrs. Henderson told her. Some men get nervous around pregnant women, but that man of yours treats you like you're made of gold. It was true. Xavier was attentive to her every need, insisting she rest when she tried to do too much, reading to her in the evenings, his hand resting on her rounded belly to feel the baby kick. July arrived, hot and dry. Beatrice, now in her 9th month, moved slowly, her back aching constantly. The doctor from Promise Creek came to stay at the ranch, not wanting to risk being too far away when her time came. Any day now, he assured Xavier, who had taken to pacing the porch like a caged mountain lion. First babies often take their time. On the morning of July 14, 1877, almost exactly a year after Beatrice had first arrived at Ellis Ranch, she woke to a sharp pain and a rush of fluid. "Xav," she gasped, clutching his arm. "It's time." What followed was 18 hours of the hardest work Beatrice had ever done. Xavier refused to leave her side, despite the doctor's insistence that childbirth was no place for a man. He wiped her brow, held her hand through contractions, and murmured encouragement when she felt she couldn't go on. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her as she pushed. "You can do this, Beatrice. Bring our child into the world." With a final, tremendous effort, Beatrice delivered their child, a daughter with a shock of dark hair and a lusty cry that filled the room. "She's perfect," Xavier said in awe as the doctor placed the cleaned and swaddled infant in Beatrice's arms. "Just like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Beatrice asked, studying the tiny face that already showed hints of her father's strong features. Xavier thought for a moment. "Hope," he suggested, "because that's what you gave me when you came into my life." "Hope Ellis." Beatrice tested the name. "It's beautiful." As the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, the new family rested together, the baby nursing contentedly at Beatrice's breast while Xavier watched, his eyes filled with a love so deep it humbled her. "Thank you," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "For what?" "For crying in that wagon yard," he said with a small smile. "For accepting my help. For loving me." Beatrice reached up to touch his face, feeling the stubble on his jaw. "Thank you for finding me. For keeping your promise about the wagon. For giving me a home and a family." Outside, the ranch was coming to life, horses nickering, cattle lowing, cowboys calling to each other as they prepared for the day's work. Inside, in the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom, Beatrice and Xavier Ellis began the first day of their new adventure as parents, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. 5 years later, Beatrice stood on the porch of the schoolhouse in the valley, watching as children played in the yard during their lunch break. What had started as a one-room school with 7 students had grown to 3 rooms and 32 pupils, with 4 small cabins nearby for those who boarded during the week. "Mama," called a little girl with dark braids, running toward her. "Billy says girls can't be cowboys. Tell him that's not true." Beatrice smiled down at her daughter. "Hope Ellis, you tell Billy that your mama rides as well as any cowboy on the ranch, and someday you will too." Satisfied, Hope ran back to continue the argument, her younger brother Thomas toddling after her on chubby 3-year-old legs. "Mrs. Ellis," called a voice, and Beatrice turned to see Lily Parker, her assistant teacher, approaching with a letter. This just came from town. The letter was from the Territorial Education Board, confirming what Beatrice had long hoped for: official recognition of the Ellis Valley School, along with a small stipend for teaching materials. "Good news?" asked Xavier, riding up on his chestnut gelding, now showing signs of age but still proud. "The best," she replied, showing him the letter. "We're official now." Xavier dismounted and embraced her, not caring who might see. At 35, he was in his prime, his face more weathered, but his eyes still holding that same storm cloud intensity that had captured her heart years ago. "Never doubted it for a moment," he said. "You were born to teach, just as I was born to raise cattle. And to be a father," she added, watching as he scooped up Thomas, who had abandoned his sister to run to his papa. "You're wonderful at that, too." Xavier settled Thomas on his shoulders and wrapped his free arm around Beatrice. "I had good motivation," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A family of my own to love." As they stood together, watching Hope play with her friends, Beatrice thought back to that desperate day in the wagon yard, when she'd thought her world had ended with her brother's death. Instead, it had been just the beginning. "You kept your promise," she said softly to Xavier. "About the wagon." He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Which one? The blue one in the barn, or the one you drove to town yesterday?" "Both," she laughed. "But I was thinking about what you said that first day, that I'd have a wagon of my own soon. And now you have two," he said. "Plus a school, two beautiful children," and he lowered his voice, "another on the way." Beatrice's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I was going to tell you tonight." Xavier's smile broadened. "You get a certain glow about you." I recognized it. His expression grew tender. "Are you happy, Beatrice?" "Truly happy." She looked around at the school she'd built, the children learning and playing, her own children healthy and strong. She looked at Xavier, still as handsome and good as the day she'd met him, his love for her unwavering. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. "This life we've built together, it's everything I could have wanted and so much more." "Good," he said simply, "because I plan to keep you happy for at least another 50 years. As the school bell rang, calling the children back to their lessons, Beatrice stood on tiptoe to kiss her husband. "I'm counting on it," she whispered against his lips. In the distance, a wagon rolled along the road toward town, its wheels catching the sunlight. Beatrice watched it for a moment, remembering her tears in another wagon yard long ago. How strange and wonderful life could be, turning sorrow to joy, ending to beginning, making dreams come true in ways you never expected. Xavier squeezed her hand, bringing her back to the present. "I love you, Beatrice Ellis." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "Always and forever." Together, they walked back to the schoolhouse, their children racing ahead, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the western sky.